She made it through the door, but not past him. Look at her, red dress, bare feet, white heels dangling from one hand like evidence she didn't mean to carry home. Her eyes wide open, chest barely moving, because breathing too loud right now could cost her everything. And him? He hasn't touched her, hasn't raised his voice. He's just standing there, shirt open at the collar, that dragon tattoo crawling up his neck like it's alive, and the way he's looking at her is worse than any threat he could make out loud. The clock behind him reads 3 a.m., and all he said was 7 words. Where are you coming back from at 3 a.m.? That's it. 7 words. No yelling, no accusation, just a question. Calm, quiet, controlled. But here's what you need to understand. Kalina isn't frozen because she got caught cheating. She's frozen because those white heels she's holding have something hidden inside one of them, something that could bring down his entire empire, something she risked her life to get tonight, and he's 2 feet away from her. She has 1 second, 1 breath to decide what her face does next, because Tawoon Park didn't build a criminal empire by missing details. And the way his eyes just dropped slowly to the shoes in her hand, he already noticed something. Stay with me, because this story has 8 twists so sharp they will cut you, and by the time we reach the last one, you're going to realize that nothing about this night was what it looked like. Not her fear, not his question, and definitely not that shoe. The penthouse breathed like something alive. Every surface gleamed, cold marble, dark glass, the kind of silence that only existed in places where money had long since replaced warmth. Kalina stood at the edge of it all, her red dress catching the dim light like an ember refusing to die, and she understood with every nerve ending she possessed that the next words out of her mouth would either save her or finish her. Tawoon hadn't moved. That was the terrifying part. A lesser man would have raised his voice, slammed a fist, made the threat physical so she could at least know where it was coming from. But Tawoon Park stood exactly where he was, arms loose at his sides, his white shirt open, 2 buttons at the collar, that dragon tattoo curling up his neck like it was listening. His eyes hadn't left her face, not once. He was reading her, dissecting every micro-expression, every shallow breath, every millimeter of movement her body made without her permission. She made herself breathe. A gala, she said. It ran long. You know how Donovan's events go. The lie was smooth. She had practiced it 17 times in the car, ironed out every hesitation, every vocal crack. She delivered it with the quiet confidence of a woman who had nothing to hide, because that was the character Kalina played in this penthouse, the brilliant, devoted wife, the woman too busy building spreadsheets to cause trouble. Tawoon tilted his head, almost imperceptibly. In the rain, he said. Not a question, an observation. She felt it then, the cold, still clinging to her skin from the 15-minute sprint through the back streets of downtown Los Angeles, rainwater soaking through her dress, her heels pulled off so she could run faster. A USB drive embedded in the hollowed architecture of the left heel currently dangling from her right hand. I got caught outside, she said, waiting for the car. He looked at the shoes. Just for a second. The way a man looks at something when he's already decided what it means and he's simply waiting for you to catch up to what he knows. Kalina's grip tightened on the heel strap. Barely. But her body betrayed her in ways she couldn't control, the slight shift of her weight, the way her chin lifted half a degree in reflex defense. She had trained herself to mask fear. She had not trained herself to mask the specific terror of a man who knew her body language better than she did. He crossed the room. Not fast. Never fast with Tawoon. He moved like a decision already made, unhurried, inevitable. He stopped close enough that she could smell sandalwood and something darker underneath it, something that had no name but every nerve in her body recognized. He reached out and took the shoes from her hand. Her chest locked, every practiced thought dissolved. He held them, one in each hand, turning them slowly, the way a craftsman examines his own work. His thumb ran along the sole of the left one, tracing, searching. She did not look down. She kept her eyes on his face, composed, present, playing the role, while internally she was calculating the exact number of seconds it would take him to find the seam, the tiny invisible seam where the heel separated from the base, where everything she had risked her life to collect was waiting. He stopped. His thumb had found something, not the seam, something else. a dark rust-brown smear on the sole, barely visible, dried at the edges. "Whose blood is this, Kalina?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples it sent through her were violent, invisible, and absolute. "Broken glass at the valet," she said. "Someone's wine glass." I stepped near it. He looked at her for a long time after that, long enough that the grandfather clock behind him marked the silence with 4 slow, resonant ticks, long enough that she felt the lie sitting between them like a third person in the room. Then he set the shoes down gently, carefully, right side by side on the marble floor, and straightened up. "Go change," he said. That was all. She walked past him toward the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold floor, her spine perfectly straight, her face assembled into something that resembled calm. She did not hurry. She did not exhale until she turned the corner. And the moment she did, her back met the wall, and she pressed herself against it, eyes closed, heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. He hadn't found it. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Tawin Park was still standing in the foyer, staring at the spot where she had stood. And in his right hand, pressed between 2 fingers, was something he had palmed in the same motion he used to set the shoes down. A thread, red silk, frayed at both ends, torn, not from her dress, from a jacket he recognized. What he did next would change everything. She should have slept. That was what an innocent woman would have done, removed the red dress, washed the rain from her skin, slid beneath the expensive sheets, and closed her eyes like someone with a clear conscience. That was the performance. That was the role. Instead, Kalina sat at the vanity in the dark, her reflection watching her from the mirror with an expression she didn't fully recognize. The dress was still on. The drive was still hidden, and somewhere on the other side of that wall, Tawin Park was doing something she couldn't see, which was always the most dangerous version of him. She had mapped this man for 3 years. 3 years of breakfast conversations and late-night silences, of learning which questions he deflected and which ones he answered too quickly, of tracking money through shell corporations with names like ghost towns in the Nevada desert. 3 years of being close enough to feel the heat of him and cold enough inside to remember exactly why she was here. She almost had him. Almost. The door opened without a knock. Tawin stepped in carrying 2 glasses of water, a gesture so domestic it felt violent in context. He set one on the vanity without a word and stood behind her, his reflection joining hers in the mirror, and for a suspended, breathless moment they simply existed in the same frame. His hands rested lightly on the back of her chair, not touching her, just present, just close. "You looked beautiful tonight," he said. She met his eyes in the mirror. "Thank you. Red always suited you," he continued, his voice low and conversational, as though they were discussing the weather. "I remember the first time I saw you in it. You were 24, a conference in Seoul. You were presenting quarterly projections, and every man in that room stopped listening to what you were saying because of how you said it." She remembered that conference. She remembered him walking in late, taking the seat closest to the exit, watching her with an expression she had mistaken back then for professional interest. "I chose you that day," he said. Something in his phrasing snagged, not noticed, not met. Chose. "What does that mean?" she asked carefully. He smiled, slight, private, the smile of a man who had been waiting for the question. He moved away from the chair and walked to the window, his back to her, the city spread below him like something he owned. "There's something I want to show you," he said. "Come." He led her to the panic room behind the east wall, a door disguised as a bookshelf, which she had already mapped and photographed 18 months ago. Inside were monitors, servers, a single chair. The air was pressurized and still, the way a vault feels when it closes around you. He sat down at the console and pulled up a file. Grainy footage. 15 years old, judging by the timestamp in the resolution. An apartment she didn't recognize at first, and then she did. Slowly, the way you recognize a place from a dream you've almost forgotten. Her childhood living room. Her stomach turned to ice. On the screen, a younger Tawin, leaner, sharper, the tattoo only beginning to climb his neck, stood in the center of that room. And there was a man A man with her father's shoulders, her father's posture, the way he stood with his left foot slightly forward when he was holding his ground. The footage had no sound. It didn't need any. "You were in the closet," Tawun said quietly. "You were 8 years old. I know you remember. I've always known you remember." The room tilted. "I didn't bring you into my life because I fell in love with you, Kalina." He turned to look at her, and his expression held something that was almost regret. "I brought you here because you are the only witness who ever saw my face, and I needed to know where you were." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 15 years of architecture, every carefully placed interaction, every moment she thought she had chosen freely, collapsing all at once. She had spent 3 years hunting him. He'd spent 15 years hunting her. That was the moment everything fell apart. She did not cry. That was the detail that surprised even her. When standing in a pressurized room with the ruins of her entire adult life scattered across a monitor screen, and her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set, her hands were perfectly still at her sides. Because Kalina Carter had cried for her father exactly once the night it happened in that closet, with her knees pulled to her chest and her face buried in the sleeve of a coat that smelled like him. She was 8 years old. She had not cried since. She had done something more useful with the grief. She had weaponized it. "Say something," Tawun said. "I'm thinking," she replied. His eyes moved over her face with that same dissecting precision, searching for the break, the fracture point, the place where the carefully constructed woman cracked open and showed him what was underneath. He didn't find it. She watched him not finding it, and something in his expression shifted, subtle, involuntary, something that looked briefly like respect. Then every screen in the room changed simultaneously. Red. An alarm, not the kind that sounded through speakers, but the kind that existed only on monitors, silent and absolute, which somehow made it worse. Tawun was on his feet before she registered he'd moved, 3 steps to the central console, his hands moving across the keyboard with the fluency of a man who had planned for disasters the way others planned for dinner. She watched his face as he read what the screens were telling him. She had studied that face for 3 years. She knew the geography of his control, the specific stillness that meant calculation, the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes that meant genuine threat. She saw both now, simultaneously. "Who is it?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. His jaw worked once. Jin Ho, his lieutenant, his right hand. The man who had been with him for 12 years, who sat at his left at every meeting, who handled the accounts Tawun trusted to no one else. "He's locked me out of the offshore network," Tawun said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before. Not fear exactly, but the particular quality of a man confronting a betrayal he should have seen coming and didn't. Every access point, the Seoul accounts, the LA reserves, the Hong Kong holdings, all of it. "He can't move it without the secondary authorization," she said before she could stop herself. Tawun turned to look at her. Slow, deliberate. "How do you know that?" he said. The air between them thinned. "Because I audited that system 18 months ago, she said. "You asked me to. The dual authorization architecture was my recommendation, remember?" A beat. Something moved behind his eyes. Verification, cross-referencing, the internal machinery of a man who trusted nothing running her answer through every filter he had. "Yes," he said finally. "I remember." She didn't exhale. She kept her expression exactly where it was. "The secondary authorization requires biometric confirmation from me and a 16-digit recovery code held by the account manager," he said. "You restructured that position 8 months ago. You reassigned the code holder." "I did," she said. "Who holds it now, Kalina?" The question sat between them like a loaded instrument, precise, pointed, requiring only the right pressure to discharge. She held his gaze. "I do." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than any they'd shared before. Not the silence of suspicion or threat. This was the silence of 2 people who have just discovered simultaneously that they need each other, and that neither of them is remotely comfortable with that fact. "The penthouse isn't safe," he said. "Jin Ho knows every exit." "I know a way out he doesn't," she replied, "because I found it, and I never told your security team." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman in a red dress, who had just told him calmly and without flinching that she had been mapping his blind spots. And rather than the anger she expected, what settled across his features was something far more unsettling. "Lead the way," he said. The service corridor behind the east kitchen had not appeared on a single blueprint she'd requested during the penthouse renovation. She had found it by accident 3 months into living there, following a draft of cold air that had no architectural explanation. A forgotten channel between floors, narrow enough that they moved through it single file, Tawun's broad frame barely clearing the walls on either side. She was in front. That was a position she had never occupied in relation to Tawun Park, and the awareness of it settled over her with strange weight. She was leading and he was following, and somewhere in the dark corridor, that fact felt like the first genuinely honest thing that had happened between them. They emerged into an underground parking structure 2 blocks from the penthouse, a black car, nondescript, but registered to a name that didn't exist. Her contingency vehicle, her escape route, the one she had staged 11 months ago for exactly this kind of moment. She had staged it to escape from him. Now he was getting into the passenger seat. She drove. He didn't ask where. The rain had reduced itself to a fine mist, the Los Angeles streets emptied to their skeletal 3 a.m. bones, and the silence in the car was the kind that only existed between people who were holding too much to speak. "The rival network," he said finally. "The one you've been feeding information to." She kept her eyes on the road. "Don't perform surprise," he said quietly. "It's beneath you." Her grip on the wheel adjusted by a fraction. "Then skip the game and say what you know. I built them," he said. 2 seconds of silence. "The network you've been working with for the past 14 months, he continued. "The drop points, the handlers, the contact you know as Director Wu. I created that infrastructure 4 years ago to catch exactly the kind of operation you were running." She felt the floor drop out of the world. "The drive in your shoe," he said. "The files you collected. I curated every document you accessed, every server you pulled from. The data isn't evidence, Kalina. It's a virus. The moment your task force uploads it to their network, it corrupts their entire evidentiary database and generates a false paper trail that implicates your handlers for systemic corruption." Her mind was moving, fast, cold, surgical, running the architecture of the past 14 months against this new information, checking every joint and weld for the places it now made sense in the worst possible way. It held together. Perfectly. Every anomaly she had rationalized, every access point that had been slightly too clean, every handler who had been slightly too available. It all reformed into a different shape, the shape of a trap she had walked into 14 months ago and called a mission. She had not been hunting him. She had been his instrument. "Why are you telling me?" she said. Her voice was even. Remarkable, she thought distantly, what the body could do when the mind had nothing left to lose. "Because Jinho doesn't know what's on that drive," Tawun said. "And right now he thinks you're the leverage he needs to access the offshore accounts. He will come for you. Tonight." She pulled the car to a stop in the shadow of an overpass. Rain ticked against the roof. She stared at the dark road ahead. "So you need me," she said. "Yes. And I'm supposed to trust the man who just told me he built the entire operation designed to destroy me." "No," he said. "You're supposed to be smart enough to know that right now I'm the only thing standing between you and men who are considerably less patient than I am." She turned to look at him then, really look at him, in the dim light, rain-blurred and close, and what she saw in his face was not the controlled blankness she expected. There was something raw underneath the surface of him, something that had been there, she realized, since the moment she had led him out of his own penthouse through a corridor his security didn't know existed. Something that looked dangerously like the beginning of trust. She faced forward again. "There's a safe house," she said, "one that belongs to neither of us." She didn't see him nod, but she felt the shift in him, the exhale, barely perceptible, of a man who had been holding something tight for a very long time. She told herself it meant nothing. She almost believed it. The safe house was a converted print shop in Koreatown, unremarkable from the outside, deliberately forgettable, the kind of building the city had stopped noticing years ago. Kalina had rented it under a name that didn't exist, paid 18 months in advance, and never once told her handlers about it. That was the detail that had always bothered her about herself. Even while working the mission, she had kept one exit that belonged only to her. She understood now why. Tawun moved through the space without asking questions, which told her he was mapping it. Exits, sightlines, structural weak points. She recognized the behavior because she did the same thing every time she entered a room. The realization sat uncomfortably. She changed in the back, pulling a dark jacket over the red dress, the dress she hadn't been able to remove yet, as though shedding it meant acknowledging how completely the night had dismantled her. Her hair, still damp from the rain, curled at the ends. She caught her own reflection in a cracked wall mirror and held it for 1 second before looking away. Focus, she told herself. When she returned, Tawun was at the table, his white shirt streaked with grime from the corridor, the dragon tattoo stark against his neck in the low industrial light. He had found the prepaid laptop she kept taped beneath the table. Of course he had, and it was open in front of him, though he hadn't touched the keyboard. Smart, he said without looking up. Biometric lock. I'm not unlocking it for you, she said. I didn't ask you to. She sat across from him. The table between them was narrow enough that she was acutely aware of the proximity, the way the light caught the line of his jaw, the way exhaustion had done something to his expression that she had never seen in 3 years of studying him. Stripped it back, made him almost human. She did not trust that feeling. Tell me about Jin Ho, she said. He's been building a parallel network for 2 years, Tawun said, using my infrastructure, my contacts, my money. He wants the offshore accounts to fund a transition, new syndicate, new leadership. A pause. He needs you alive because you're the only one who can authorize the release. And you? He needs me dead for the same reason. Silence. There's something else, Tawun said. His voice changed, a register she hadn't heard before, something underneath the control. His hostage. The woman he took tonight to guarantee my cooperation. Who? He looked at her directly. Her name is Su Yan. She raised me after our parents died. She's the only person outside this table who knows where the secondary authorization code is stored. Kalina went still, because she knew that name, not from his files, not from 3 years of deep cover intelligence. She knew it from a handwritten letter she had received at age 16, slipped under the door of a group home in Compton. Your tuition has been arranged. Study hard. Be someone they cannot ignore. Signed only with initials. The woman who had quietly, anonymously funded her education, her academy application, her entire trajectory, was Tawun Park's sister. The monster who had destroyed her childhood had unknowingly financed the weapon built to destroy him, and his sister had known exactly what she was doing. Kalina's hands were steady on the table. Inside, something seismic was shifting. She didn't know yet which direction it would fall. What she did next would change everything. They came at 4 a.m. No warning, no sound until the back window imploded inward, and the room filled with the controlled, practiced movement of people who did this for money rather than loyalty, which made them more dangerous than either. 4 of them. Tactical gear, no insignia, the kind of professional silence that meant they had a contract and a deadline. Kalina was already moving before the glass settled. 3 years undercover had not been spent sitting at a desk. She cleared the table in one motion, put the wall at her back, and had the small firearm from her jacket holster aimed at the entry point before Tawun had fully risen from his chair. She felt him register that, the speed of her, the precision, and file it away without comment. The lead operative held up one hand. We're not here for him. Then why is he still breathing, she said. Because our client wants you functional and cooperative. The operative's eyes moved to Tawun with professional neutrality. Him we have instructions to remove. Tawun stood completely still. No fear visible. Just calculation, the same cold internal machinery she had watched operate for 3 years, running odds, measuring angles. The offer, the operative continued, looking back at Kalina, is this. You come with us. You apply your accounting expertise to a global network. You live exceptionally well. You never look over your shoulder again. And him? Handled. Quickly. Cleanly. The word handled dropped into the room and sat there. She looked at Tawun. He was watching her with an expression she could not fully read, not fear, not plea, something more complicated. The expression of a man who had spent 15 years controlling every variable and was now standing in a room where the only variable that mattered was a woman he had underestimated from the beginning. She thought about her father, about the closet, about 15 years of grief compressed into a mission that had turned out to be someone else's architecture. She thought about Su-Yan, the letter, be someone they cannot ignore. She thought about the drive in the shoe that was designed to destroy innocent people. She shot the operative, not fatally, shoulder, clean, deliberate, a message, not an execution. The room erupted. She moved through it alongside Tawun, not because she had decided to trust him, but because the alternative was worse, and Kalina Carter had always been ruthlessly pragmatic about worse. When it was over, 2 operatives were down and 2 had retreated. The safe house was compromised. The prepaid laptop was destroyed in the chaos. Tawun stood in the wreckage, breathing hard, a cut above his left brow bleeding quietly down his temple. He looked at her across the ruined room, this woman in a red dress and a dark jacket, her chest heaving, her expression utterly unreadable. And something moved across his face that he didn't immediately suppress. "You could have taken the deal," he said. "I know," she replied. "Why didn't you?" She picked up her jacket from the floor and checked the remaining ammunition without looking at him. "Because they were going to use me to hurt people who had nothing to do with this. And I don't do that." He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said finally, as though confirming something he had already suspected. "You never did." She didn't know what he meant. Not yet. But something in the way he said it felt like the edge of a door opening onto a room she hadn't known existed. She wasn't ready for what was inside it. He was bleeding more than he'd admitted. She found out when he sat down against the wall of the secondary location, a parking structure 3 blocks from the print shop, chosen in 30 seconds of running, and his hand came away from his side dark and wet, not the temple cut, something from the chaos she hadn't seen. "How bad?" she said. Not a question. "Manageable," he said. "That's not what I asked." She knelt in front of him, and the geometry of that moment was not lost on either of them. Kalina Carter on her knees in front of the man she had spent years dismantling, pressing her folded jacket against his side with both hands, her brown eyes level with his. His jaw was tight. The dragon tattoo moved with each labored breath. "Why did you really marry me?" she said. Not the version he'd told her in the panic room, the real one. She could feel the difference now. 3 years of reading him had taught her the texture of his truths versus his performances, and she wanted the thing underneath. When he looked at her for a long time. "Because you were the most dangerous person I had ever encountered," he said, "and I couldn't decide if I wanted to stop you or watch you win." The confession landed quietly. No drama, no manipulation she could identify, and she looked for it hard because that was who she was. She found nothing. Just a man bleeding in a parking structure telling a truth that had cost him more than he would ever say out loud. "The memory," she said. "My father. Was it real?" His eyes didn't move from hers. Yes. One word. No softening, no qualification. The brutal, clean respect of telling someone the truth when the lie would have been so much easier. She absorbed it, processed it, placed it exactly where it belonged in the architecture of everything she now knew. "Then we have a problem," she said quietly, "and because I still need to finish what I came here to do." "I know," he said, "and you're going to let me." It wasn't a question. It was a test, the final one, the kind that couldn't be manufactured or rehearsed. She watched it move through him, watched him arrive at the answer the way a person arrives at a decision they've been avoiding for a long time. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she pressed the jacket harder against the wound and told him to stay still. She didn't examine what she felt in those seconds. She locked it away in the same place she kept everything that threatened her clarity. But it was there. It had been there for longer than she wanted to admit. And he had known. She didn't know yet what he planned to do with that knowledge. That was the part that should have terrified her most. But 2 years later. The cottage sat on a bluff above the Pacific Coast Highway, small, white, surrounded by wild rosemary and the sound of water. Kalina had chosen it the way she chose everything, deliberately, strategically, with 3 exit routes mapped before she signed the lease. Old habits, the kind that kept you alive long after the mission ended. And it had ended. Officially, completely, with testimony and commendations and a sealed file that the department would never publicly acknowledge. Jin-Ho was in federal custody. The syndicate was dismantled. The virus on the drive had been neutralized by her own hand before it reached a single server, because she had gone back quietly and pulled the real evidence from a source no one knew she had maintained. Town Park had disappeared. No body recovered. No confirmed location. The official report listed him as a fugitive, status unknown. She had read it twice and then filed it in the drawer where she kept things she didn't allow herself to think about. She was good at that. The evening was cool, the sun dropping fast behind the water when she came home from the market with 2 bags and her hair down for the first time in what felt like years, loose curls falling past her shoulders, a simple white linen shirt, bare feet on the porch steps. She looked like a woman at peace. She was almost a woman at peace. She reached the front door and stopped. The porch light cast a shadow that didn't belong to the rosemary or the eaves or any structural element of the cottage she had memorized in the first 48 hours of living here. It was a human shadow, still, patient, the shadow of someone who had been waiting and was in no hurry. The grocery bag settled slowly to the porch floor. He stepped out of the dark at the side of the house, older by 2 years, a scar along his left jaw that hadn't been there before, dressed in dark civilian clothes that couldn't quite disguise the particular way he occupied space. The dragon tattoo was visible above his collar. He was alive, completely, unmistakably alive, and in his right hand, held loosely at his side, was a white high heel, her shoe. From that night, he turned it over once and she heard the soft click of a second compartment releasing, one she had never found, nested deeper than the first, smaller than a thumb drive. "Your father didn't just witness my meeting that night," Talon said quietly. "He recorded it. Audio, documentation. The complete ledger of every transaction from the previous decade. He held the shoe toward her. He hid the only copy here. He was protecting you. He knew if it was ever found on him, you'd be the one they came for." The Pacific roared below them. "He was trying to give you a future," Tawun said. "I spent 2 years finding this so you could decide what to do with it." Kalina looked at the shoe, at him, at the distance between them that was both 2 steps and 15 years. "Did you really think the clock stopped at 3 a.m.?" he said softly. And this time, unlike the last time those words had lived in her memory, there was no cold smile, no threat. Just a man standing on her porch in the dark, holding the last piece of her father's love, offering it back with both hands. She was frozen again, but this time it wasn't fear. "Drop your city in the comments right now. I need to know who stayed until the very end of this one. And if this story moved you, hit subscribe, because Kalina is standing on that porch. The evidence is finally in her hands, and what she decides to do next will be the most powerful moment in this entire series. Chapter 10 is coming, and trust me, you are not ready for it.